Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. If there was ever a question about how popular former champion Mike Tyson remains with us, the boxing fan, and also the public more broadly, it's certainly been answered in the age of Corona. Sure, the boxing news might be a bit threadbare right now. There's no boxing to speak of. We don't really know when things are going to get back to normal. But this talk of Mike Tyson getting back into shape for some potential exhibitions to raise money for charity, it's gotten fans all hot and bothered in a lather, as has his brief pad work clip. That's gone viral. Here it is on screen. Tyson showing some of his trademark speed and power. And then we've also had recently Jeff Fennick, who worked with Tyson for a time, claiming that the 53-year-old who's been retired now for 15 years, maybe removed from his prime for 20, that he'd be able to beat Deontay Wilder right now if he gets in shape and beat him under a round. And we also have a $1 million offer from Australia for Tyson to fight well-known rugby league player Paul Gallen or dual international Sonny Bill Williams, who played both rugby and rugby league for New Zealand. And yes, for some Northern Hemisphere listeners, they are two different sporting codes. There is a difference. And also Barry Hall is in that equation as well. He's a former AFL star. And I'll come to each of these issues one by one. But first I want to start by saying Mike Tyson, that's a name that's going to live on in sporting history long after he, you, or I are gone, long gone. The name Mike Tyson at this point has pretty much transcended his own achievements. And the recent headlines and fan fervor proves that he's still a superstar in his own right. And for those who want to debate that, I don't really believe it's up for debate. The guy is still a massive deal, and always will be. I can only think of a handful of boxers who've scaled the heights of fan popularity and have still sustained fan interest and beloved by the public. Like a guy like Mike Tyson. It just really is incredible. His career in terms of the exposure, the publicity, and the continued and sustained publicity that he gets. And people are still deeply fascinated by his career, his backstory, the hard times as a kid that made him into the person and the fighter and the champion that he ultimately became. And people are still interested in what he's done after boxingly. I mean, seemingly he's a guy we want to hear from more and more, even though he's been retired, as I said, for 15 years, and his best work was done about 30 years ago. And you only need to check the myriad of highlight videos that do the rounds at any given time, the views that they get, to see that the interest in him is still so strong. And it also extends to the many shows and activities that he's involved in. And his move into the legal side of the weed business, that's another wrinkle that has some people fascinated, and he's building a very lucrative business on that front. But the first issue, the reaction to the pad clip, because some of these things popped up and on its own I wasn't going to address them, but with everything sort of coming together in the last week or so, this is why I've done this video. But that pad clip, I guess everything in this pandemic, it has seemed a bit amplified, especially because there's a lack of boxing news and general content around for boxing. This sort of thing, the pad clip, that was always, even if there was boxing on right now, it would have got its fair share of coverage. But I think it's fair to say it's got more than it otherwise would have, because there's nothing much doing. People have actually gone really wild about these few seconds of training footage. And I've seen a fair few comments around the place saying that he would beat a bundle of guys in the heavyweight division, top 10 guys even at 53 years old. And no Luis Ortiz jokes, please. I'll also tie in here the Fennick comments that Tyson beats Wilder in under a round. Obviously, Wilder has previously been on the record saying that he would beat prime Mike Tyson, the 1986 version of Mike Tyson, and that he'd, as he put it, kick the hell out of that guy. And I know some people feel a certain way about those sorts of comments. I'd say in relation to all of that, Mike Tyson coming back, pad work, and this Deontay Fennick comments, etc., there's a reason that Tyson is targeting exhibition fights and pledging the money for charity. And largely that's because he's 53. He's a guy that is not in his prime, that physically probably can't hold up to the sort of rigors that people think he can. Sure, he might look explosive on the pads for a few seconds, but even going for 2 minutes and attempting that his old style, he'd be blowing hard after 30 seconds. I mean, people seem to forget that the faded version of Tyson at the end of his career. I mean, do people forget he looked well past done when he retired, taking losses to Danny Williams, Kevin McBride, guys that he never would have lost to in his prime. But by the time he was at the end of his career, he couldn't sort of foot it in the heavyweight division any longer at a high level. Even when he fought Lennox Lewis back in 2002, which is arguably his last big fight. Well, it is his last big fight, and who knows what he had left at that time. I think he was well past his best when he fought Lewis. It was probably needed to happen 5 years earlier. But now being, at this point, 15 years retired, people have got to keep their expectations in check about any opponents for an exhibition and how he would look in that fight. If he looks washed 15 years ago, a 15-year layoff won't have helped things. I mean, if it's like 3 times 2-minute rounds, for example, against someone who's also in their 50s or maybe someone in their late 40s, and that opponent's maybe had boxed at some good level, has a profile, we're interested in seeing the exhibition, it's all for charity, it's all fun, then it's going to be interesting because it's on an even playing field and maybe it's not going to be taken too seriously. And it would be for charity. And I guess the question is, on that front, would they be looking to take lumps out of each other, try to take each other's heads off? I'm not so sure, because maybe it wouldn't be that sort of event. But, it is Mike Tyson after all. He's extremely unpredictable. Who knows if he'd lose his rag if he got punched and woken up and, really sort of spurred into action to really go after his opponent. And Danny Williams, actually, one of the guys who beat him in his last couple of fights, he's put his hand up saying he wants a rematch with Tyson. He told The Sun, "I can confirm that a few of my agents have put my name up to fight Mike Tyson. We're still awaiting the answer, but it's definitely a fight I want. I'm very interested in facing Mike Tyson again." And to me, that sounds like, Danny Williams, who's still an active heavyweight, even at 46 years old. He's been, what is he like? I'll just bring up his record just a second here. Danny Williams, 54 wins, 28 losses. So he's devolved into a journeyman at this point. A slew of losses in the past decade or so. But, to me, that smells like he's trying to sniff out a payday here, because obviously he's one of the few guys that has a win against Mike Tyson, and that's something that he could maybe leverage into some sort of lucrative exhibition for himself. He's still been fighting, all these years later, and Danny Williams currently 46 years old. But I got to say, I'm not interested in that fight. I wasn't interested in that fight when it first happened. But at that point, Tyson had gone well past, when he should have been fighting. But obviously that happens with a lot of heavyweights. I wouldn't mind seeing, though, Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield. And there's been a little bit of news around that Holyfield, he might make some sort of comeback. Who knows? I mean, a lot of this stuff is being amplified, as I said, in the age of Corona. There's not a lot happening. And with these guys, these legends, saying certain things, it's getting picked up. There's the environment for the media to just gobble this up, and it gets column inches galore. But if those two, Tyson and Holyfield, if they fought for charity, it would generate a lot of interest. But in terms of the ring performance, how Mike Tyson might look, what I'm really trying to convey to people is, don't be surprised or disappointed if a 53-year-old guy comes back and fights like a 53-year-old guy. He's not going to be able to do things he was doing 30 years ago. And if he can do something, it might be for a very brief spurt or two early in a fight. And I guess that brings me to the whole Jeff Fenech and Tyson beats Wilder comment in a round. If it were prime for prime, my personal opinion, I'd be picking Mike Tyson to beat Deontay Wilder. And that's just my opinion. Your opinion may differ. And that's all it can ever be, an opinion. No matter who you think wins or how, we ain't going to get that, because it won't be prime for prime. It's not going to be it's a fantasy thing that can never happen. But if it's 53-year-old Mike Tyson in the flesh now versus the current version of Deontay Wilder, I think it's a massive leap to say that Wilder gets steamrolled in a round. I know some people's hate for Wilder will prevent them from acknowledging that he's more likely to beat a 53-year-old man than the other way around. But, it's never going to happen. But, it is fun to talk about. But I think if we're realistic about it, a guy like Wilder who's, closer to his physical prime than a guy like Mike Tyson, who looked washed 15 years ago, you have to look at that and be realistic and objective about that too. But that's also just my opinion, and if you have a different one, that's fine. As for this Australian opportunity, that kind of falls a little bit loosely into the same sort of category as my last comment to some degree. You've got Sonny Bill Williams, who, while at the end of his career, he's on a lucrative 2-year deal with the Toronto something, he's still a world-class athlete. And for those who don't know, he can box. He has been New Zealand champion, so he's not some sort of total scrub being pulled out who's got zero experience in the ring. Although he was never a guy, in my view, that was going to go to the world level or anything like that. But he does have some solid fundamentals. But yeah, I mean, Paul Gallen as well. He's looked okay. Barry Hall, who fought Paul Gallen last year, that was a pay-per-view. Same thing. All in shape, all good athletes, much closer to their physical primes. But this whole $1 million offer to Tyson to fight one of them, I still don't know what to make of it. I mean, is it for fun? Is it going to be a pro fight? I mean, what's the actual sort of detail wrapped around this? And I ask that because these three have been fighting in pro fights, you know, and Gallen and Hall, that was a pay-per-view in Australia last year. So I guess, you know, is their purse for charity? Or is it just Mike Tyson's? You know, there's a lot of unanswered questions here. How serious is this going to be if this was to, in fact, actually occur? And when you start to think about the matchups, does Mike Tyson's obvious skill and technique make up for his 53-year-old body against these guys who are athletes who are a lot closer or at the end of their physical primes? I know that there's going to be a wave that think Tyson's just going to blow all three out, but is he? He might have one good round in him. It might even be half a round. It might be like the pad clip. He can go for about a 7-second burst and then he has to have a minute recovery. I mean, from what I've seen of Gallen, Williams and Hall, they can all go rounds. And Tyson would have a significant height and reach disadvantage against all three. And if they can weather an opening flurry or two against a faded Mike Tyson, do they then start to be able to get into the position to start touching him up? You know, box at range, use their height and their reach, because that'd be an obvious strategy, right? I mean, I don't really see any of these fights happening, but it's interesting to talk about. I mean, I think it's more likely that Williams could fight Gallen at some point, or perhaps Gallen would have a rematch with Hall. Their first fight ended in a draw. So Melbourne-based promoter Brian Amatruda, he's the one that's sort of floating this. He's made the offer for an Australian fight for $1 million for Mike Tyson, which actually, would that be, you know, not enough? If you were to get him to, and his purse to be for charity, do you need to make it significantly more? So Amatruda, he has spoken to the media saying, you know, I'll hold it at Melbourne Arena where we'd get 10,000, or even Princes Park where we got 30,000 for Jeff Fennick versus Azuma Nelson. He might be 53 years old, but he's still a huge name, and any of those blokes, Hall, Gallen or Sonny Bill, would jump at the chance to get in the ring with him. It would be enormous, not just a fight, it would be an event. And he's right. It would be a massive event. Mike Tyson back in the ring, even at 53. It's huge news. But all three of those guys that he's floated, Gallen, Hall, Williams, they'd undoubtedly probably take it very serious. And if they were able to beat up or even stop Mike Tyson, they'd be remembered for that forever, just as the likes of Danny Williams and Kevin McBride are for their wins over a living legend at the end of his pro career. So, you know, I like the idea and the thought of Tyson coming back for some sort of ring return, even if only for charity, you know, because of these current times that we're in. It obviously has been a difficult period around the world, and it certainly, if they were to get some sort of event, doesn't matter where it is, it'd be a media circus, an event to look forward to. No matter who it was against or where it was, it would just be absolutely wild. And I do hope it's more of the charity route as opposed to a pro fight, because Mike Tyson, you know, he drew a line under his career. And if he was to have another pro fight, you know, I think it could be an opportunity where it might chip away at his legacy a little bit. I mean, even if it was for a good cause. But it's certainly been an interesting week or so with all this unexpected Mike Tyson news. And I'm interested, how do you feel about all the stuff that's floating around? Drop a comment. Loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.